to the Mark Twain House Museum. Thank you all so much for coming tonight to this very exciting event. This award is in its third year, and that is largely, almost entirely, due to the gracious and generous funding and founding of David Baldacci, who's here on stage. Thank you, David. We are also grateful to have last year's award winner, Bill Beverly, in the audience. Where are you, Bill?
I'm here.
Twain was a remarkable writer and a remarkable personage, but one of the things that we recognize about him as a writer was that his ability to create amazing character and speak in an American vernacular was far beyond its time in the 19th century and was perceptive. And so this award was created to bring forth the idea that there are uniquely American stories told in a uniquely American vernacular and in an American voice. And we have been able in all 3 years of this award to bring out really amazing stories, remarkable stories that are told in an American voice. And we think it's an important contribution to literature today. Awards like this are important because they help us create landmarks in our time, and this book is a landmark in our time, and we're very pleased and honored to have Jesmyn here tonight and to honor her with this award. In an 1894 letter, Twain himself said, "Creed and opinion change with time, and their symbols perish, but literature and its temples are sacred to all creeds and inviolate." I want to thank a few other people. Our judges, Dr. Kerry Driscoll, Carol Goldberg, who I think is here in the audience, and Jacques Lamar, I don't think Jacques is here, along with numerous volunteer readers who waded through many books, some really fine submissions. We had some wonderful entries this year, more than we have ever had before, which is a great thing. The award is being recognized and well received in publishing circles. Of course, I would also like to thank the many staff who make this event possible, in particular Jennifer LaRue, our Director of Writing Programs, and Donna Larson, who coordinated the process and whose office is just littered with books at this point. This is a fun time of the year because all these books come in and you get to say, "Oh, I want to read that one, and I want to read that one." This is a great place to work that way. So with that, I would just like to say one other thing, and that is that pre-signed books are available for sale after the event, and we encourage you to get one because this is really a work that will stay with you. It is filled with some amazing characters, beautifully written and beautifully thought out, and it is as haunting as some of the ghosts that are in it. Jesmyn sadly will not be available after the event due to a family conflict. She has to pretty much leave as soon as we're done, but it has been wonderful to have her here and to be able to get to know her a little bit, and we hope that she will come back. And with that, I would like to welcome David to the stage.
You know, I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and I came up from there today. So this quote on the wall has particular meaning to me. It just doesn't seem as funny as it used to. Jesmyn Ward is currently an associate professor of English at Tulane University. She has twice won the National Book Award for Fiction. She's also been shortlisted for major awards, including the National Book Critics Circle Award and Virginia Commonwealth University's First Novelist Award. I'm a VCU alum myself, and that award, I funded that award for a number of years. I told Jesmyn earlier, you should have won that year. Far and away the best finalist. I would also like to give a shout out of thanks to Doug Siebold of Agate Publishing. He published Miss Ward's first novel. This is about the time she was debating whether to give up writing to become a nurse. I have no doubt she would have been a very fine nurse, but the world would have lost a remarkable and much needed voice in literature had she done so. So thank you, Doug, wherever you are. The award being given out tonight is for Sing, Unburied, Sing, which also won the National Book Award. A good novel can usually give us one or two great characters. I counted at least 8 in Sing, Unburied, Sing. Jojo, Pat, Mam, Leonie, Kayla, and Michael. For you math whizzes out there, that's only 6. The 7th is Gibbon, Leonie's dead brother, and the 8th is Richie. In creating Richie, I think Miss Ward was channeling her inner Gabriel Garcia Marquez's magical realism, as Richie is presented as a spirit and finds an enduring but troubled connection with Jojo. But both Gibbon and Richie punch far above their ghostly weight in the story. I'm not sure how one precisely defines a great novel, but as Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart said about pornography, I know it when I see it. And I saw a great novel in every page of Sing, Unburied, Sing. The story is utterly engrossing and executed flawlessly. The prose is original, the observations spot on, the metaphors and symbols read both large and small. You know, they're bold as brass at times, and at other times so subtle and nuanced, you catch yourself a few sentences or a paragraph or a page down the road before it actually hits you. This book is also chock full of truth and told in a way that is deeply personal, profoundly haunting, remarkably complex. Its characters contradictory and conflicted, good at times, bad at other times, flawed, vibrant, wounded, resilient, meaning they're as real can be. It speaks to family dynamics at its very core, a biracial experience that strikes bone marrow deep. And this novel also contains a forceful critique of the past and also a powerful vision of the world currently. A not unambitious task, the one Miss Ward tackles head on with muscular vigor coupled with a gifted storyteller's sensibility. Miss Ward was quoted once as saying, "When I hear people talking about the fact that they think we live in a post-racial America, it blows my mind, because I don't know that place, I've never lived there." I was born and grew up in Richmond, Virginia, the old capital of the Confederacy. You can't throw a rock anywhere in Virginia without hitting something having to do with the Civil War. And the way they teach U.S. history in Virginia is a little bit different. I remember this vividly in 4th grade. We were in May 1863, and I went home and came back the next day, and we were in World War I. And I asked my 4th grade teacher, weren't there 2 more years to the war? And her response is something that's been seared into my mind ever since. She said, "You know all you need to know about the war of Northern Aggression." So I took it upon myself to learn the last 2 years of the war. And of course, anybody knows the Civil War, May 1863 was Gettysburg, when the war turned against the South. As a child growing up in the 60s and 70s in Richmond, I lived in a world of separate everything. This despite the Supreme Court having ruled in 1954 that separate but equal was inherently unequal. Virginia was one of the first southern states to integrate its schools. That took place in 1972. 18 years after the highest court in the land said, we must unite the races with all due speed. And attempts at integration back then did not resolve the issue. The most famous street in Richmond, Virginia is Monument Avenue. It's lined with enormous statues of Confederate generals and leaders. glorifying men who turned against their country to keep others enslaved. Protests and demonstrations broke out in Richmond when there was a movement to put up a new monument on that hallowed street. It was of a native Richmonder and black man named Arthur Ashe, who gave more good to the world than all the others deified on that street combined. Protests and hatred against an iconic, world-famous native son because of his race. That did not happen in 1896. It happened in 1996. And now we have Nazis and white supremacists openly marching through the streets once more and spewing hatred across the globe on social media platforms, and political leaders unabashedly having their collective backs. Every day, we hear a new story of police being called on people of color because they have the audacity to barbecue at a public park, swim in the community pool, walk into their own homes, sit on their own porches, take a nap at their university, mow their own grass, drive their own car, hail a cab, or look at someone, or being shot for having a phone in their hand or a taillight out on their car, or for doing exactly what they were told to do. In every ledger of everything we keep track of, the color of one's skin in so many fundamental ways still seems in the 21st century to be the basis for reward or rejection, for living or dying. That, apparently, is post-racial America. And that, in many profound ways, is exactly what Miss Ward's novel speaks to, at least it did for me. I have often wondered what Samuel Clemens, the most quoted and misquoted person of his time, ever ready with a quip usually launched against the rich and powerful, would say about what is going on today. I believe he would be both justly appalled and justly overjoyed at the sheer abundance of fresh material at hand. Let's all agree right now, the late night shows have never been better. But can you imagine Mark Twain on Twitter? I would personally give all I had to witness that. I am certain that if Mr. Clemens were alive today, he would gladly elbow me out of the way to present the award tonight. It would do so far more eloquently than I have managed, but it is up to me to do that honor. So please join me in welcoming the 2019 Mark Twain American Voice Literature Award winner, the remarkable Jesmyn Ward.
Associated with the award, everyone who made this happen, everyone who took time out of their busy lives to read my work and engage with my work and find some truth and beauty in it. So thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with you all, and thank you all for coming out tonight and spending a little time with us. And with me specifically. I have done a few events where absolutely no one showed up. I always like to begin by thanking people when they decide to come out and spend a little time with me. So thank you very much for being here and for having this conversation with me. I thought that it would be a good idea to read a little from Unburied, and in particular to read from a section of the book that is about a relationship between two characters. I think one of the things that I associate really strongly with Twain's work is his ability to develop characters on the page and to make their relationships seem real and rich and fraught. So I'm hoping that the scene that I'm reading attempts to do what he does so well in his work. So I thought that I would read a bit from chapter 11, which is JoJo's chapter in the book. So I need to set you up so that you're not completely lost. Seeing Unburied does follow this 13-year-old mixed-race boy named JoJo. His mother is sometimes neglectful, sometimes abusive. Her name is Leonie. Much of the book follows her and JoJo and his younger sister Kayla and a family friend as they travel north to Parchman Prison in Mississippi to pick up JoJo's father, Michael, from prison. But when they arrive at Parchman, JoJo really discovers, he is approached by a ghost, and this ghost is a ghost named Richie, and Richie served time with Pop, JoJo's grandfather, in Parchman Prison during the 1940s. The ghost actually climbs into the car with them, and he decides that he is going to travel south with them, right? So the chapter that I'm reading from is when JoJo and Leonie and Richie and Kayla and the family friend arrive in Bois Sauvage in Mississippi. And JoJo is reunited with his beloved grandfather, Pop. So I think that you might have enough information to follow along. And if you do not, I apologize. So I'm just going to read a scene, basically, the scene that begins the chapter. Chapter 11, JoJo. I pulled Kayla out and ran to the porch, to Pop and his lighter, bright as a lighthouse beacon as it flashed in the dark. I skipped the steps and leapt up to the porch, coming to a fast stop in front of Pop, like the rabbits that creep around the house when the sun sets, eating, stealing, then running only to freeze again, saying to me, so delicious, but still, yes, I see you, calling to one another, run, halt. Son, Pop says, and grabs the back of my neck, his hand large and warm. My wrists feel raw. My mouth comes open and I breathe in. It sounds like a web of phlegm is in my throat. My eyes are burning and I shut my jaw and clench my teeth and try not to cry. I breathe again and it sounds like a sob. But I will not cry even though I want to duck down with Kayla, want Pop to fold me in his arms and hug me to him, want to smash my nose in his shoulder so hard I can't breathe. But I don't. I feel his hand on me and rise on my toes so he presses harder. I can feel the heat of his fingers. He lets his hand run down my back to rest at the top of my spine, and I even imagine I can feel the whirl of his fingertips, the blood push back under his skin. Pop, I say. Pop shakes his head, gives my back a little rub. Go put your sister to sleep. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Me and Kayla eat crackers and pimento cheese and some smothered chicken legs Pop got in a skillet on the stove, wash it down with water. I think about putting Kayla in the tub, but then I hear the shower, and when I hear Mam's and Leonie's voices in the room and see Pop's lighter flash on the porch, I know it's Michael. Kayla lays her head on my shoulder, grabs my hair, rolls my curls around her finger like a noodle. Ma'am? Pop? Her breathing gets slower, and then she's slobbering on my throat, and I know she's asleep. But I don't put her down because I'm looking at Richie, who's looking at Pop, who's looking out to the black yard, the far road. The boy's face shows in fire, and I ain't never seen that look before. I ain't never seen somebody look at someone else like Richie looks at Pop. All the hope on his face, plain in the circle of his mouth, his wide open eyes, the wrinkle of his forehead. He steps closer and closer to Pop. He's the cat then, fresh-born, milk-hungry, creeping towards someone he'd die without. I lay Kayla down on the sofa and step out onto the porch. Richie follows. Riv, he says. Pop flicks his light, lets it die, and flicks it again. Riv, Richie says again. Pop pulls phlegm up his throat, spits off the porch, looks down at his hands. It was quiet here without y'all, Pop says. Too quiet. The lighter flame shows his quick smile and then is gone. I'm glad y'all back. I didn't want to go, I say. I know, Pop says. I rub my wrists and look at Pop's profile flare and fade in the light. Did you find it? Pop asks. Richie takes a step forward and the look changes, just a flicker. He glances between me and Pop and he frowns. Bag, I say? Yeah, Pop says. I nod. Did it work? It's a gree-gree bag. I shrug. I think so. We made it. Got stopped by the police though, and Kayla was sick the whole time. Pop flicks the lighter and the flame blazes for 1/2 of a second, the fire bright and cold and orange, and then sparks out. Pop shakes the lighter by his ear and lights it again. Why can't he see me? Richie asks. It was the only way I could send a little of me with y'all. With ma'am, Pop clears his throat, sick, and that being a place I can't go back to, Parchment. Richie is inches away from Pop. I can't even nod. See your face every day, like the sun, Richie says. Pop pockets the lighter. You left me, Richie says. I slide closer to Pop. Richie reaches out a hand to touch Pop's face and sweeps his fingers across his eyebrows. Pop sighs. You better watch out, boy. He used to look at me like that, Richie says. His teeth are white in the black, tiny and sharp as a kitten's, and then he left me. I have to talk against the pockets of silence he creates whenever he speaks. The bugs shush for him with every word. Does she feel any better, Pop? Pop searches in his pocket for something and then stops. Sometimes I forget I don't smoke, he says. He shakes his head in the darkness. I can hear the slide of his hair against the wall of the house he sits against. She got worse, son, Pop says. You was the only daddy I ever knew. Richie's voice was soft as a mule. I need to know why you left me. Richie is quiet. So is Pop. I slide down the wall and sit next to Pop on the porch. I want to lay my head on his shoulder, but I'm too old for that. It's enough to feel his shoulder rub mine when Pop passes a hand over his face, and he begins to flip the lighter over and under his knuckles like he does sometimes with knives. The trees murmur around us, nearly invisible in the black. And I hear Leonie come walking out Mam's room, breathing as hard and deep as if she'd been running, pulling in her breaths like it hurt. I look up at the glittery sky and search for the constellations Pop taught me. The unicorn, I say, as I identify it, Monoceros, the rabbit, Lepus, the great snake, Hydra, the bull, Taurus. I learned the proper names from a school library book. I know Leonie must be looking out at the porch, wondering what me and Pop are doing in the dark. The twins, I say, Gemini. Leonie's room door opens and shuts, and I see Michael babying Leonie when she was sick. I see the way Leonie didn't do nothing when that cop put those handcuffs on me. Richie looks at me like he knows what I'm remembering, and then he sits across from us, curls over his knees, wraps his arms around his back, makes a sound like crying, and rubs what he can reach of his shoulder blades. My wounds were here, right here, he says, from Black Annie. You healed them, but you left, and now you won't see me. I lay my head on Pop's shoulder anyway. I don't care. Pop breathes deeply and clears his throat like he wants to say something, but he doesn't. But he doesn't shrug me away. Forgot about the lion, Pop says. The trees sigh. When we go inside to lay down, Richie still sits, no longer rubbing. Instead, he rocks back and forth faintly, and the look on his face is broken. Pop shuts the door. I curl around Kayla on the sofa and try to lie still, to forget the broken boy on the porch long enough to drift to sleep. My spine, my ribs, my back, a wall. So one of the things that impresses me so much about Mark Twain's work, which I think I've expressed before, but I'll say it here again, is that he had courage when he wrote. There was a sense of fearlessness to his writing. He wasn't afraid to look at American society, to look at the culture that he was a part of and to write frankly about it. And he was not afraid to reckon with the taboo, I think. And so that's one of the most significant things to me about his work, and something that I try to emulate in my work. I try to write towards those topics that other people might avoid. I try to write towards what is painful, to write towards the darkness, because I feel in part that the only way that we can begin to have conversations about those things and begin to work towards remedying those things is by writing about them, and having, and for them to be part of like the sort of public consciousness and public conversation. So that's the first thing that really resonates with me about his work. In preparation for this award, I began to try to learn a little bit about Mark Twain's life, and I found out some sort of interesting facts about him that I identified with. So I thought that I would share those with y'all as well. The first thing that I found out, I hope this is all right, is that I didn't ask anyone before I got up here, but I found out that he was born 2 months premature, and that he was so small and sickly when he was born that his mother said that she could see no promise in him. And that was really notable to me because I was also born prematurely. I was born at 6 months instead of 9 months. And I was also very small, 2 pounds 4 ounces, and sickly when I came out. But it's my mother did not say she could see no promise in me. The doctors sort of, I was so small that the doctors thought that I would die, and so they told my parents this, and they tried to prepare them for the fact that I would not last for long. But I, like Mark Twain, fought to live and endured. I'm especially impressed because he did it with much less technological help than I had. So the first notable thing about his life that there's a second notable thing about his life that I really identified with. The third thing is that I found out that he was a slaveholder's son, but that the first important storytellers in his life were Black people who were enslaved, right? And he would, visit the enslaved people who were owned by his father, and there was an Uncle Daniel that was mentioned, and he would listen to them sort of tell stories, right? And so these were the people who sort of taught him about the power of storytelling, and how a well-told story could take you out of your own experience and put you in a completely different experience. And also, I think probably communicated another sort of aspect of storytelling, right? That a good story can not only take you out of your experience and make you feel another experience, but it can also make you feel empathy for someone else who is in a completely different situation than you are, right? And who leads a completely different life than you do. And I suspect that was a pretty important lesson, that he learned and that marked him for the rest of his life, and that really influenced his development as an artist, right? And so later I found out that the first piece that he published in the Atlantic was the account of a freed slave. She was a cook at Quarry Farm, right? And so she told him a story about her time in the South as an enslaved woman, and how her children and her entire family was like sold away from her. And then how years later she found her youngest child, who was now an adult, and he was sort of fighting for the North, right? And this story so affected him that he decided to write this tale, right? And then submit it to the Atlantic. So I found that meant a lot to me when I read it, because I feel like, you know, I came to a love of reading sort of on my own, but the people in my life who taught me the most about the power of storytelling, you know, these are older people in my family, right? Because I used to do the same thing as that Twain did when he was young. I would sit around and listen to adults tell me stories about their lives, right? So my maternal grandmother, my father, my mother, and they all told me stories about what it was like to live in the South in the 1940s, what it was like to live in the South in the 1960s, right? And hearing those stories, you know, taught me the importance of storytelling, but that I think also made me begin to understand how powerful sharing that past could be, or sharing stories about the past could be. So that's another little fact about his life that really you know, I identified with very much. And so the last sort of fact that I learned about his life, that he was one of the first writers to believe that art could be created out of, he was one of the first writers to believe and express that art could be created out of the American language, right? The American vernacular. And that is something that I have invested myself in and championed my entire career. I've often faced some resistance to that idea from other writers who I've worked with, or sometimes professors that I've studied with, right? And sometimes it's hard for them to sort of to understand why the people that I write about, who are mostly poor, mostly black, mostly Southern, how they could have these very rich interior lives and express themselves in really complicated ways. But I feel like, you know, if I'm following in the footsteps of Mark Twain, I'm doing something right, right? Again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for honoring me in this way. I just, you know, hope that I can continue to, you know, follow in his footsteps and uphold, you know, his literary legacy into the future. So, thank you.
I think we have time for a few questions from the audience, if you would like. Anyone? Yes.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, you have such a beautiful voice. I look forward to reading your book. Do you teach as well? Are you trying to pass on your trade to younger folks too? Because it's such a gift.
I do teach. I teach at Tulane University. I teach undergrads actually. Each semester that I teach an intro to creative writing course, and that's mostly all freshmen actually who take that course. And I teach, you know, we talk about fiction and poetry and creative nonfiction, and then I also teach advanced fiction courses, and so I get some older, you know, seniors and juniors mostly, students in those sections. But I do teach. I enjoy teaching. It is definitely something that I have to work at, you know, but I really do enjoy it, because the students are, you know, they're so talented, they're so driven, and I like getting the opportunity to read their work and hopefully to inspire them with the reading that I bring into class. They're always sort of trying new things, because they're at the very beginning of their writing careers, right? So no one has told them that they can't do this or they can't do that. So I feel like because their vision is so like fresh and they're untrained, that keeps me sort of on my toes. It helps me to, I think, be flexible in my own ideas about what creative writing can do.
Are you working on a book now, and are any of these characters going forward, prequels, sequels, whatever?
I am working on a book now. I am working on a novel that is set in New Orleans, during the height of the domestic slave trades in the 1830s. So none of the characters in Sing Unburied Sing are in this novel. And I'm writing it very slowly. I'm still working on the rough draft right now, but it's coming. It's just taking a little time because I've never written anything like this. So.
I read your book as part of the PBS NewsHour book club, and it was very real. You were writing about real reality, and that Parkman prison still is, and it's still a problem.
It definitely is. I mean, it's funny because I thought that everyone knew. I thought that readers in general would know that Parkman was a real place and that it existed, and they would know just a little about its history, at least, like the role that it played during the civil rights movement. I don't know. I thought that it was like that it was a structure, it was an institution that existed in public consciousness, and so it was really interesting for me when the hardcover was published, and then when I began like meeting readers and doing events, to discover that a lot of people thought that it was a place that I created, that I made up. So that was very interesting for me. I mean, when I was growing up, when I was a child, I knew about Parchment. I'm saying when I was 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, I knew about Parchment Prison. I knew it was a terrible place. I knew it was a terrible place that no one ever wanted to go there, right? But I also knew that there was a real danger that I could end up there, or that people in my family, people in my community could go there one day. I didn't really know how to process that as a child. I remember having nightmares about, about my father and all my uncles being like rounded up and taken away to Parchment prison. So, I mean, as a child in Mississippi, like it's definitely, it's definitely something that we grow up with. But it's funny because when I began working on the book, not funny, but when I began working on the book, I realized even though I grew up knowing about Parchment Prison, I really didn't know enough about the history of Parchment Prison. And so I had to do a lot of research to learn about the history of the place. Sing Unburied Sing wasn't a ghost story in the beginning. It was just a road trip. And then as I began to do more research about Parchment Prison and found out that kids like Richie existed, I realized I had to write about a child like that. And so then it became a ghost story because I wanted him to exist in the present and to have power and agency that he didn't have as a child, alive, serving time as a 12, 13-year-old in Parchment Prison. And so I made him into a ghost.
I so enjoyed spending time with your characters, and I particularly like the richness of their relationships. They were just absolutely beautiful. I left the book feeling so hopeful for JoJo and so hopeful for Kayla. It was clear that they were going to have wonderful, rich futures. I'm wondering what you think about Leonie's future. I mean, you gave her a few glimpses that she was going to grow up, but I wonder if ultimately you really think she's going to, because there were also so many things that held her back.
That's a good question. Leonie is one of the hardest characters that I've ever written, because at the beginning of the rough draft, when I was writing from her perspective, and even when I was writing from JoJo's perspective, there was some distance between her and me and her, and normally when I write, I feel that I feel real love for all of my characters as I'm writing them, and I think that perhaps that love comes from a place of empathy and sympathy. But I found that when I was writing Leonie's perspective in the very beginning of the rough draft, I wasn't feeling empathy and sympathy for her. Instead, I mean, I'm a mother, myself. I was judging her, right? And I was constantly like asking myself in the back of my brain, why is she doing this? I don't understand why she's treating her children like this. How could she do this? And so I actually had to stop, like in the 3rd chapter or so, because I realized that because I didn't feel real empathy or sincere love for Leonie, I was judging her, and I wasn't writing her character as well as I should have been. And I realized that she was in real danger of being flat, and of being just a villain in the story. And so then I began to try to figure out why she conducts herself the way she does, and why she abuses her children, and why she, it can be neglectful, and why she mistreats the people who love her. And that process of inquiry is how I found my way to giving, and to the fact that she suffered a great loss, and she has a character flaw. Her character flaw is that she can't sit with pain. Things that are painful for her, she can't confront them, right? And learn how to work her way through them and live with them, right? If you notice, every time in the book when she begins to thinking about giving, right, and thinking about her grief, or thinking about something painful, it's like she comes close to the subject and then she veers off, right? She acts out, or she abuses drugs, or she just does something else so that she doesn't have to sit with that uncomfortable, painful sense of grief, of loss, or emotion. And unfortunately, that was one of the most heartbreaking things for me about writing her character, was that by the end of the book, I realized that even though she'd been through this traumatic experience and done this thing that took great courage from her mother, right? She still was not able to sit with it. That was still that inability to work her way through an uncomfortable emotion, or painful emotion, or grief, or loss, that's still with her, right? And because that's still with her, she can't learn how to live with the multiple traumas, multiple griefs, multiple losses that she's experienced in her life. And so that's why in the end, she's sort of the same person that she was beforehand. And she runs off with Michael. But that was really heartbreaking to me when I realized that her kids, as you're saying, I think that's a great reading of it. Her kids, they're going to be okay. Even if they experience, more trauma and grief and loss in their life, which they will, right? They will be okay because they have such a solid foundation of love, right? From Pop, from Ma'am, with each other, right? And their relationships are so strong, right? And I believe that really gives them, a strong foundation and a certain amount of strength and love that they can draw from, as they face these things in their lives. But I don't know, because she can't sit with the painful things, she just can't reckon with them. So she doesn't change.
Take one more question.
Besides Mark Twain as inspiration, were there other writers, primarily women, who also informed you and inspired you?
Yes. Of course, Toni Morrison. If you're going to write a ghost. You can't help but think about Toni Morrison. You can't help but think about Beloved. I was also, while I was working on Sing Unburied Sing, thinking about a writer called Gail Jones, who wrote a book called Corregidora, which is in part about generational trauma, and how one trauma that happened long ago can then affect a family generation after generation after generation, reverberate, throughout time. And so I was thinking about that too. As I was writing about Parchman Prison and what an experience in that place, what that would do, to a family down through generations. Who else? I tend to love all of Louise Ward. Louise Airdrie. The way that she writes about Indigenous people, the love that is present in her work for her characters, the poetry of her language, I admire it all. So I look to her often for guidance. And I read a lot of poetry. I love poetry. I love Claudia Rankine's courage, and her like straightforwardness, and her commitment to writing, again, like Twain, like writing about difficult subjects. I also really admire Natasha Trethewey, her work. She's a really beautiful poet. She's from Mississippi. She's from the coast, actually, Mississippi Gulf Coast, which is where I'm from. And so I look to her work. Her imagery is often so very vivid to me. And this feeling that I get when I read her work, there's something in her work that I recognize as home, like immediately when I start reading. I'm like, oh, she got it right. It's the same way I feel often when I read Faulkner. Like, I'm like, okay, I know this place. I know this place that this writer is writing about, is exploring. So those are some of them, not all of them, but those are some of them. Women writers who I love.
Thank you, Jesmyn. Thank you for a remarkable